Well, that sucked, didn't it? Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Kazenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I hope you are doing well despite Sunday's result with the Bengals losing to the Ravens at home in their season opener 20-0. I will be joined shortly by my co-host, Scott Schultze. We'll be talking about the Ravens game, dissecting that. I'm going to start with my own analysis of it, and obviously we'll get Scott's once he joins the program as well. We are going to talk about the Houston Texans game. Again, short week. The Bengals, they had a rough game on Sunday, obviously. Maybe one of the best ways to remedy everything is to come back on a short week. But we'll be talking about that. There's a lot of news and notes to get to. And, of course, we'll be taking your live fan questions as well. Thank you for tuning in on kind of an irregular day that we normally, for those of you who watch the show, download the show, we record the program usually on Wednesday nights when the Bengals are on a traditional schedule, whether they're playing Sunday night, Monday. We usually record Wednesday. With the short week, we wanted to get people not only the chance to kind of download the program, get a couple days in there, but just kind of made a little more sense just with the shorter week to record a day early. So who made the time and altered your schedules to join us, appreciate it, and we'll be taking some of your questions in a little bit. If you are new to the program, you can download this show on YouTube, on SoundCloud, all of our materials on Cincy Jungle. We're on, I believe I said iTunes. You can get in touch with the program on Twitter at BengalsOBI or via email, theobinsider@gmail.com with questions, comments, all of that. We'd love to hear from you. We appreciate all of your support over really, we're right around just over the year mark of this program now, so that's pretty cool. Appreciate it. Let's just get to it, I guess. Much like the Bengals don't want to watch the film of this game, I don't really want to talk about this game, but we're forced to. There's a lot of topics on the table, and really the debate, there's basically three groups of people to blame for this performance. The defense, in my opinion, should not be one of them, nor should special teams, really, because it's not like Randy Bullock attempted a kick of any kind to miss or make or what have you. Kevin Huber, I mean, he just kind of had a sort of a pedestrian day as a punter, and he had to punt a bunch of times. The defense was put in awful positions all game and only let up 20 points. That includes Dalton's five turnovers, another turnover on downs in the red zone. You can't blame the defense, in my opinion. Should there be should there be some improvements in run game? Should there be some improvements in the pass rush? Sure. You could tell as this game wore on that the defense was getting gassed. And when you looked at the statistics, I didn't really process this on Sunday or Monday. I kind of reviewed some of the statistics today. Joe Flacco threw 17 passes in the entire game. 17. And he completed 9 of them. Nothing special. 1 touchdown, 1 interception. That to me is indicative of, the Ravens were protecting their quarterback who had a herniated disc in his neck, and obviously they wanted to limit him taking hits. He did take a couple of big hits though after throws. So kind of kudos to him for toughing that out. There was a couple of big hits. Geno Atkins, I thought, played very well. Nick Vigil had some ups and downs, but had a nice interception. The defense is not to blame here. I think we can all agree on that. Special teams, just kind of a pedestrian day, as I said. Obviously, it comes down to 3 different groups of people, as I said. The coaching staff, Marvin Lewis and Ken Zampese, more specifically. The quarterback, Andy Dalton, who had 4 interceptions and a lost fumble. And the offensive line. So I guess what I'll do, as more of you are starting to join us, and again, this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. I'll be joined by my co-host Scott Schulze shortly to assist in some of this analysis and breakdown. Appreciate you joining us live. Let's start with, I guess, the low-hanging fruit and Andy Dalton. Okay, all of a sudden now, the Boo Birds were out at the first sign of trouble at Paul Brown Stadium. There's obvious pros and cons or different opinions on whether fans at a home crowd should do that, should be booing, should be booing their home team, even though they are playing very poorly. Obviously, for those of you who tune into CincyJungle.com, there is an article about some fans out there who really took it to Dalton on his way out of the stadium in terms of, we miss Carson Palmer and one guy threw a hat at him. I mean, just stupid behavior. But unfortunately, not only does that fit a stereotype and a narrative of Bengals fans in recent years, but it also shows the level of frustration that the fan base, and wrong way to display it, don't get me wrong, wrong way to display it, but it shows the level of frustration this fan base is feeling really since you go back to that wild card game against the Steelers. It's really just been this constant boil over of emotions and anger from Bengals fans, and some know how to express it, some don't know how to express it in a good way, but obviously, you look at Dalton and you say, okay, if you watch the game, you saw him force a throw. And Dalton has been a guy in his career who's been great in the red zone in terms of taking care of the football, in terms of, limiting damage, all of that kind of stuff. He forces a throw to Brandon LaFell in triple coverage. Don't understand that. Interception. He holds on to the ball forever towards the end of the second half. Fumble away. Chance for points gone there on a third down. Other throws, I mean, the last interception, if you remember that one, he threw it to A.J. Green on an out route to the sideline. It wasn't even close. I mean, the throw was late. The throw was behind Green. Interception. You could argue that I know there are a bunch of games in Dalton's career. He's had a lot of great games, a lot of good games, a lot of solid games. There are a handful of really bad games. This one is up there, if not the worst, I think I have seen him play. I know you can go back to that Thursday night game against Cleveland. You can go, some of the playoff games. Gotcha. Got it. But this one, to me, he just didn't look right from the get-go. Now, the question, and I want to talk more about this with Scott when he hops on here, the question I have is, is this Andy Dalton having a bad game, just a bad day, bad game, good game planning by the Ravens, and it was kind of a perfect storm of a lot of different things going on, or is this, which segues into the next group that needs to be looked at with the result of this game, is it the offensive line? Obviously, we've talked at length on this program, CincyJungle.com, all of the other Bengals news sites. We've talked at length about this being the weakest link of the team. There's no doubt. Weakest link of the team. Lost your Whitworth and Kevin Zeitler. And now you're looking at Trey Hopkins having an injury as well. Could be serious. He was your starting right guard. It was a disaster on Sunday on the offensive line. So I guess where I waver a little bit, to me, the offensive line is paramount. Obviously, quarterback plays paramount too, but your quarterback can't function well if he senses pressure, even if he thinks that this pressure when they are not. And if you look at some of the things on CincyJungle.com, I put a couple of articles up showing some tweets of some videos and things like that of how the offensive line was playing. Russell Bodine, I saw him get pushed back in Dalton's lap. I saw him land on his butt at one point. Jake Fisher had a holding penalty. You can say what you want on that. He also, at another play, inexplicably was completely far away from blocking anybody on the play. That's on Twitter. It's on CincyJungle.com if you don't know what I'm referring to. But he almost looked, in the middle of a play, he almost looked like he was running off the field and to avoid like a 12-man on the field penalty. It was bizarre. Cedric Ogbuehi, he got beat by Terrell Suggs, and if you remember, Andrew Whitworth was extremely effective against Terrell Suggs, especially in recent years, in terms of limiting sacks, limiting pressures, all of that kind of stuff. Kudos to Terrell Suggs, who is just an ageless wonder, Hall of Fame type of player, but you can see the drop-off. You see the drop-off with Whitworth to Ogbuehi. You see some issues from Fisher on the right side. Trey Hopkins didn't play well before he got injured, didn't get much better after that. I will say this, the one area that the Bengals seem to be able to do something on the offensive line is running the football, at least with Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill. Jeremy Hill had 6 rushes for 26 yards. Giovanni Bernard had that nice, I believe it was a 29-yard run. So they were able to do some things on the ground, but they fell into a deep hole. The play calling, at first it was predictable. To give Ken Zampese a little credit, he changed it to quick hitting plays, but then that, and there were batted balls at the line, interceptions created from there, and it just got predictable. There's just so much to say about the offensive line. I just mentioned Zampese, which is the third area we need to start critiquing when it comes to this game. And I guess you could throw the front office into that discussion as well, because they didn't retain at least one of the 2 guys in Zeitler and Whitworth, which I think they should have. Should they have kept both? Yeah, you could argue that, for sure. Necessary to keep both? Probably, I guess. But even if they kept one, I think most Bengals fans would say, okay, I get it. You drafted these 2 tackles in Fisher and Ogbuehi. Maybe it's a little bit of a luxury to bring back both of them, but they should have kept at least one of them in terms of Zeitler and Whitworth. Also, side note, the Bengals signed Andre Smith. They were thinking he was going to take the starting right guard spot. He didn't. Then he's not even the backup right guard when Hopkins leaves the game. It was TJ Johnson. So either he is performing very poorly in practices, in preseason, has lost a step, whatever the case may be, or they're using him as, kind of that emergency tackle, and they don't want him getting hurt, which he's had a history of doing. So they want to make sure he's healthy in case of Ogbuehi, Fisher go down, struggle more, what have you. Going back to coaching, if you watched a post-game video clip from Dave Lapham and Dan Hort of Bengals.com and the Bengals radio network, Dave Lapham had said that this was a game that Marvin Lewis and the Bengals were preparing for since the onset of training camp. So you're talking end of July, essentially. They would slowly build a game plan, and this is a team that they know very well. This is even though there's a couple new faces at wide receiver for the Ravens, these are guys they know well. Mike Wallace, only in his second year at Baltimore, but was with the Steelers. The Bengals know him well. They've played Jeremy Maclin before when he was with Kansas City. They know him well. Brashad Perriman, young guy, okay. Hurt them, but the Bengals obviously did not put together a good offensive game plan to be able to be successful, and that's on Lewis and Zampese. And I noted a little bit of adjustments that Zampese made. I believe it was in the early second quarter when he started going more in these quick hitting passes. The Bengals ended up getting yards in between the 20s, if you will, but could not convert, They kept turning the ball over, shooting themselves in the foot. Just when you saw them do something right, they, there's a penalty, there's something like that. To me, and we can harp on, there's people that are already calling for A.J. McCarron. There are people that are calling, including Stephen A. Smith, calling for Marvin Lewis's firing. I get it. It's knee-jerk. It's a poor showing. But to me, one of the things that really – and it's a small thing, but it's a very telling thing to me. When you start at home, you haven't played at home since 2009 in Week 1, right? That's the last time the Bengals opened at home. You start at home against a divisional rival, and your first offensive play from scrimmage is a false start. That should tell you everything you need to know about your preparation, about your offensive game plan, about who you have out there. It's just that kind of set the tone. And it's a little thing. Maybe I'm overreacting to that, but that it just was very telling. Now, you look at the Bengals ended up having 9 penalties on the day. A couple of them that ended up leading to a Ravens field goal were terrible. One on William Jackson, I believe, was on a 3rd down. He got called for pass interference, didn't see it. Nick Vigil got another one shortly after, didn't see that one. Very ticky-tack plays. You can even argue, and if you follow our friend Joe Goodberry, who's been on this program before, if you follow him on Twitter, he has a little video clip that I thought was interesting about Jake Fisher, and I believe it was the play he was called for holding, and it was more like the defensive end was stumbling more so than Fisher was grabbing and pushing him to the ground. So, it just, in a variety of aspects, it wasn't their day. I think now, and I want to get to some of the comments in the YouTube chat here. I don't know if this is an aberration, because we look at this team and you see a lot of talent on the roster. You do, and mostly at the skill positions, a lot of it on defense. And again, another side note to the defensive performance, to let up 20 points off of 5 turnovers plus a turnover on downs in the red zone, to only let up 20 points without Adam Jones, without Vontaze Burfict, without Sean Williams. That's three starters right there. To be able to do that, that tells you you've got some talent on that side of the ball. Yes, the Ravens are, not the greatest offensive team, but Flacco can wing it when he wants to. He was rusty, but the Bengals defense did more than their part, in my opinion, to keep the Bengals in this game and to possibly win it. The offense kept shooting themselves in the foot. So I guess now the debate is, and I don't know if I fully have an answer because it's just 1 week into the season, but it's an aberration in terms of, hey, Dalton had a bad week. If you look at his career, he's good for 1 or 2 clunkers a year, along with a lot of other good games per year. Was it just a perfect storm combination of bad game plan, underestimating your opponent, Dalton having a bad day, couple of bad calls on penalties, just a kind of a perfect storm? Or is this a trend of, look, this offensive line needs work? This offensive line maybe right now I would say they are the second worst offensive line that I've seen in the NFL so far 1 week in the year. And luckily, the one who I would say is behind them would be the Houston Texans, who let up, I believe, 9 or 10 sacks against Jacksonville last week, which was just ridiculous. But so is this an aberration? Is this, hey, one bad week? Or is this, oh boy, this could be a long year, even though we thought we got a lot of good players through the draft and whatnot. Maybe the Bengals made some mistakes in the latter half of the draft. We talked about this, about moving around, moving up to get picks. They didn't do that. Maybe they made a mistake not trading A.J. McCarron to get some immediate draft collateral that could be a decent pick. Instead, he's on the bench. There's a lot of things to criticize, and unfortunately, it's just 1 week into the season. Let me get to a couple more thoughts. in our YouTube chat here. Marvin was Bass Hunter. Marvin was clapping half of the time. Come on, man. These are men, not high school kids. Yes. Marvin and his let's go with a clap has been a standard for over the past 15 years. Tom Brooks says the Ravens put 8 in the box a lot, so why not run it? They did that, Tom, and that's a good point. They did that because what they did is they bracketed double and triple coverage almost at all times to A.J. Green. And kudos to them, because in the last few games, and really we talked about this last week, in the last 5 games, A.J. Green has 6 touchdowns. The previous 5 games, not including this one, had 6 touchdowns and 3 100-yard performances against the Ravens. So they did their job, and they did what they were supposed to do. Now, John Ross didn't suit up for this game. Maybe not having that speed on the opposite side didn't keep the Baltimore defense honest. Brandon LaFell had trouble getting separation. Tyler Boyd had trouble getting separation. Tyler Eifert had trouble getting separation. And the Bengals had trouble moving the sticks. They had trouble in the red zone. And when Tyler Boyd and Tyler Eifert each only have 1 catch in a game, that usually tells you that you're not being successful on offense. A.J. Green could have all the stats in the world, but if you're not getting the guys that get some of the other chunk yardage, do the work in the red zone, like Boyd does in the middle of the field, like Eifert does in the red zone, for you. A lot of talk about this because not only was he a Bengals assistant coach for a long time, there was supposedly some sort of vague succession plan in place for him to take over for Lewis. And then also you look at the Browns putting up a pretty decent performance against the Steelers, even though they lost. Brad Van Horn in the YouTube chat says you can see the fire in Cleveland. Fire Cleveland played with, and that's what Hugh Jackson brings out of the players. Marvin has never been able to do that. Bad coaching. This is going to be the hot button topic now. At least for the next day or two, depending on what happens Thursday against the Texans. Is Marvin Lewis the guy? Is he the coach? Is he the guy you want for this Bengals team? Good at amassing talent through the draft, sort of. That's another topic for another time, but go do yourself a favor and look at some of the middle rounds of some recent drafts of the Bengals, and you won't see too many of those guys on their current roster. Go check that out. But top end of the draft, pretty decent. He did find some gems in some middle rounds, that sort of thing. This almost seems to be. We hear a lot about the Bengals quote-unquote culture. The culture of, hey, we let stuff slide and we bring in guys that may have questionable character, and, there's accuracies with those stereotypes. There's inaccuracies with them. Those of us that follow the team pretty closely understand that. But do have Adam Jones, Vontaze Burfict, Joe Mixon on their roster. I mean, it's just kind of the truth. I guess Marvin is a guy, and I've been thinking about this over the past couple of weeks. Marvin is a coach who, especially in recent years, has really tried to trust his veterans. He believes that he's built a team with a lot more of responsible veterans and a lot more of responsible players on this roster than in, say, his early years with Carson Palmer, the explosive teams, but Chad Johnson was a wild card. Chris Henry was a wild card. You had guys that were kind of more about the flash than the substance. He believes that he has a team now, and there's merit to it. Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap, Michael Johnson. These are guys that are good guys that they for the most part produce on the field. They're good character guys. They do a lot in the community. Andy Dalton. A lot of these guys. So I think he has a little too much trust and a little too much of a lax attitude with the team saying, hey, I'm going to more trust my veterans not to say, I don't want to say to help me coach, but that's where some of the accountability is going to be, is through my veteran guys. Well, you let Andrew Whitworth walk out the door. You let Kevin Zeitler walk out the door. Say what you want about Domata Pico, but he was a guy that was a locker room guy that they loved. I just wonder if he needs to baby and micromanage necessarily this team, but I wonder if Marvin has just too loose of a leash on this team and these guys. And I love the guy, and we'll talk about this in a minute. I love the way he plays and brings attitude, but Vontaze Burfict, fresh off the suspension, gets a huge contract. So I don't know about the message there. Did Vontaze deserve a contract extension? Yes, but there are concerns there in terms of playing time and his availability. So I don't know. It's just easy after 1 week and such a bad game, such a bad performance on so many levels to question what the front office has done or not done, to question the game plan and the accountability that Marvin Lewis brings as a coach. Quarterback plays in question. You can't turn the ball over 5 times in a divisional game at home and expect to be because then and then the offensive line, and that kind of feeds back into the front office, paying guys, and sometimes you overpay for somebody, and it ends up, even though they may not, you feel like, hey, I'm paying too much for this guy, but they end up kind of being worth it, at least for a Band-Aid. And I think maybe Whitworth would have been a guy that should have been a career Bengal, a guy that you keep for another 1 to 2 years, and I think that the line would be in a lot better shape right now. Even with him at the end of his career, the line would be in a lot better place right now. But Bengals lose 20-0 at home against the Ravens. The good news and bad news is that they have a quick week. Maybe they just kind of trash the film from the first week, and maybe they play up, pretty mad this week and really take it out on the Texans. We'll get to the previewing of that game in just a minute. But I want to get to some news and notes before we talk about the Texans and get to some listener questions, and submit those listener questions to us in the live YouTube chat or on CincyJungle.com's live comment feed that we have going on there as well. The Vontaze Burfict signed a 3-year, I think the figure was $38.67 million figure. He's going to be one of the highest paid linebackers in the entire NFL in terms of average salary per year. Highest paid 4-3 linebacker, because the other guys ahead of him are outside linebackers, but they're guys like Justin Houston, Von Miller, guys that are pass rushing type of linebackers. So from a traditional linebacker standpoint, I guess, Vontaze Burfict is now going to be the highest paid player at his position. And, I can criticize a little bit about the timing of the deal given his suspension, but when he's on the field, he's a top 5 player at his position. There's no doubt. This defense that did pretty well last week, given the circumstances, will be better once he's back after the 3-game suspension. Unfortunately, these 3 games they're tough. They had the Ravens at home. Even when the Ravens aren't the typical Ravens, they're tough. They've got the Texans, and though it doesn't look like they're, they had a really bad first week themselves, the Bengals have had trouble beating Houston and have had trouble on primetime. We'll talk more about that in a minute. That's troubling, and then obviously they have Green Bay in Green Bay, and that's troubling there. But after that, Vontaze Burfict joins the team, and he'll be there provided he's healthy. Will be there for the remaining 5 divisional games that that are on the schedule. I see my co-host Scott Schultz join me. I'm going to get to him in 1 second. Just some other quick news and notes. John Ross and Dre Kirkpatrick returned to practice on Tuesday. Dre Kirkpatrick is walking boot, and then went on and is healthy now, I guess. And John Ross obviously missed the opener and is back. We'll talk more about that in a second. I believe I am joined by my co-host, Scott Schultz. Scott, are you there?
Yes.
How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm assuming I didn't miss anything.
Well, well, yeah. It's kind of like watching the Bengals game on Sunday. You didn't really miss much if you didn't watch it. Tell you what, I'm going to give you the floor a little bit. I just wanted to get some news and notes and all of that stuff in. I'm going to give you the floor, and here's kind of what I talked about before you got here. I talked about, is this an aberration? Is the week 1 loss an aberration, or is it a sign of things to come? And who do you place the blame most on, Dalton, staff, or the offensive line?
Okay. I can probably make this pretty quick, and I don't know if I'm going to reiterate what you just said, but for me, it's clearly the offensive line. I mean, Dalton obviously had a horrible game. I mean, some of those throws, you kind of have to wonder what he was doing. And unfortunately, it was very reminiscent of, I believe it was the Tampa game, where opening drive, we drove all the way down the goal line, and then he threw the pick that cost them the touchdown in the opening drive of that. I think it was the second preseason game. So seeing him do that again on multiple occasions, and granted, you could argue, okay, one of them was a tip, but 5 turnovers is just, I mean, tip or no tip, that is just a very poor game. And so you kind of have to hope, aberration that he's not really known to be that bad, especially on the Sunday 1 p.m. games. I mean, that's supposed to be his sweet spot. And then he's supposed to get bad on games like Thursday night, Monday night, playoffs, but not so much in those primetime game or in those non-primetime games. So it unfortunately kind of looked like what we saw in the preseason. And I don't know, it was just, I think I'm in the same boat all the fans are. How do you explain that?
Right.
I mean, the good thing was the defense held their own. I mean, they gave up like 260 yards despite having poor field position the whole game and 5 turnovers going against them. I guess so I want to say, granted, Dalton had some bad passes, but I'm not going to put it all on him. I think it's also it's hard to not say coaching, because I mean, you look at their decision to go, punt on 4th and 3 in Ravens territory on in the fourth quarter. I mean, most rational coaches don't do that. I mean, that was just a bizarre. And how are you supposed to get some sort of offense going if you have your team saying, yeah, we just aren't even going to try, we just give up? So yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of blame to go all around. But so I've mentioned the quarterback, I mentioned the coaching, and also you can have the arguments, the coaches don't even start the best players, which is another frustration. But I think ultimately it has to go to the offensive line, which is kind of the coaching because they're the ones that put it together. But at the same time, they have to do a little better. And I think we all kind of saw going in, this team is a very good team, assuming the offensive line can hold up. Everything else is pretty much on tap except for the offensive line. And unfortunately, we didn't see too much of that this week. And granted, Charles Suggs is good, but it's not like we're facing, the 85 Bears or something crazy like that. This isn't the Ravens team of a dozen years ago when they won the Super Bowl with that great defense. They have some good players, but it's not a team that should be beating you like a drum. And losing their best line, I guess I'd call him their best lineman, Trey Hopkins, in the game. It kind of makes you wonder, you're asking is it aberration or not? And as much as I want to say it's an aberration, if the offensive line struggled that much, home opener, pumped up against a decent but not great defense, and you get beat around like that, and you already lost your 2 best players in free agency, you now lost one of your other best replacement players, Yeah, unless they figure that blocking out, it could be a very, very long season.
So, do you think it's simply a bad week from Andy Dalton, or do you think the offensive line really kind of got into his head on some of these throws?
I'd say as far as Dalton's passing, I think it's a bad week, but he tends to be a quarterback that needs, the pieces around him. He's not going to create it on his own. You can't put him on any team and expect him to succeed. Succeed, not secede. He's not leaving the union. But I guess that's a debate for another show. But anyway, you've got, like we saw 2 years ago, you put the pieces around him or some of his better years, you give him the blocking, you give him the weapons, he can do a good job. But you have to have those. He has the weapons this year, but he doesn't have the blocking. And that's always, other than the deep ball accuracy, the other knock on him has always been when he's under pressure, when he's under duress, he's not a guy who tends to create. He tends to crumble, make a bad throw it away, just stand there, wait for the sack a little too early. And unless they get the blocking figured out, even though I think it was more of an aberration on Dalton's part with just the bad decisions, I think he could be forced into a lot more games like that, which aren't really characteristic of him, only because I don't know if this offensive line is going to give him the time to do anything different. Kind of like we saw Joe Mixon. I mean, Joe Mixon, I think we've seen from preseason, from college, from everything we've seen, he is a very good running back and probably the best one on this team. Fourth quarter, they start handing him the ball. He gets tackled 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage on back-to-back plays. There's just nothing you can do in that situation. And same with Dalton. I mean, you're getting guys running over Bodine and going around Ogbuehi on every play. There's not really a whole lot you can do. I mean, you can do a little better than throw it to the defense, but at the same time, you're not going to be able to be the, you can't be as successful when you are, if you're not a great player, you need to have things around you working well. And if they aren't working well, yeah, I don't know. I want to say it's an aberration, but I guess I'm very pessimistic, and I'm thinking it could be a lot worse.
Yeah, it might be a bit of a trend going forward. We'll see. I guess the problem I have, and I kind of talked a little bit about the front office and the coaching staff before you got on here, Scott. The problem, one of the flaws of this team and its ownership and its coaching staff is the hesitancy to with a player, or kind of cut bait with certain players. They are very committed to Russell Bodine. He had a rough game. They seem very committed to their two, and I guess they should, because they invested a first and second round pick in Cedric Ogbuehi and Jake Fisher a couple years ago. They seem very committed to them. And the product is not very good. So I guess we got to ask ourselves, and I think we've asked this question before a little bit on the podcast, is how long of a leash do these guys have? And are the Bengals going to scrape the free agency waiver wire? Are they going to, kind of shuffle things around, because this is a team that's talented in a lot of different spots, and they got to get that figured out. Do you think this is a very conservative team and conservative franchise, the way it's run, the way it's coached? Do you see it changing this year, especially if these offensive line issues continue?
I think, and I can't speak for the front office, but I think the consensus is probably, if this year looks like Sunday looked, we could probably finally see the change top down. Not so much the Mike Brown top, the level below Mike Brown. From that level on down, the guy who's in his 15th year with no playoff victories, being the head coach, who seems to struggle in primetime games, and that's been all beat to a dead horse. How the primetime, the playoff, how he's great against teams unless they're good, but. Yeah. And so I think it's on one hand, it's like, well, some fans have been wanting that for a long time. So, you don't want to become the Browns and say, let's just root to be horrible, because it's a really good quarterback class, and we might finally get the coach we've been wanting for, the last 4 or 5, 6 years. But like you said, they have enough good pieces that they could do something, and they tend, they build through the draft. Obviously, Boyhe and Fisher were first-round picks. The intent was we're going to draft these guys. We're going to build our line using them when whichever pieces leave, which was Andre Smith, and then this year, obviously, Zeitler and Whitworth, and of course, Smith came back, but he's not a player they're using in their lineup. Replace him with Hopkins, and Hopkins got hurt. But anyway, yeah, this is a team where they have a plan. We just hope to get good enough players in the draft. We build, we sustain, but it's a strategy for kind of like a status quo, kind of like a tread water, where we're never going to add those pieces we need to really fly. But as long as we do good enough drafting and keep the best ones, and kind of build and just sustain what the draft gives us, we're going to be able to have a solid, decent team that stays afloat, that, 500, a little better, plus or minus here or there, but it's just really hard to take the next step doing that. And I think the biggest thing is going to be probably the offensive scheming. What are they going to do to get Dalton the protection, assuming Boyhe and Fisher don't take that next step and become, the next Andrew Whitworth and Willie Anderson?
There's a lot of stuff in the YouTube chat here about what we were talking about to your point just now that you made about offensive game plan, offensive scheming. Royal Flush 513 says the hurry up offense was working. Why the hell did they stop? You said it was a rhetorical question, but I mean, it's a question worth asking. That was working, as was briefly the like I mentioned before you got on here, Scott, that was working, as was briefly a change that Ken Zampese made to more of a quick hitting, get the ball out fast type of offense. Unfortunately, then the Ravens kind of caught on there, and they were doing more jumping at the line instead of bull rushing and knocking down passes, tipping them up in the air, which created turnovers. The offensive line not only will need to protect Dalton better, but they also need to open up some passing lanes for him as well. James Bodine had a quote-unquote Bodine had a rough game. Seems we tend to say that more often than we say, quote, Bodine had a solid game. True. Also question in here, Brandon Albert is still out there, isn't he, on the free agent market? He is. Those are guys, in terms of him and Nick Mangold, those are guys that seem to be more Bengal fits in terms of free agent pickups, guys that are over the hill. They could get them cheap. They get them after a week 1 or 2. Maybe we see them. They seem very committed to who they have on this line, so we'll see there. A couple others in here. Raja V. I defend Dalton. Only one pick was his fault. The others were caused because he was rushed. So, I mean, just some additional thoughts there from some of our listeners. We appreciate that. You can leave us some listener questions. We'll get to those at the end of the show. We are running a little long right now, but we've got a couple already in the queue, and if you want yours answered on there, we will do that. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza, joined with Scott Schultz, my usual co-host. It's good to have him here, despite the result of what happened with the Bengals on Sunday. If you're new to this program, you can catch us on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, CincyJungle.com. Get in touch with the program at BengalsOBI. If you're on Twitter, you can send us an email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you there. Scott, I guess the last part of the news and notes I wanted to get to, and this is kind of up your wheelhouse because you really this was one of your favorite picks in the Bengals draft class. The Bengals, when they made their final roster, they gave the kicking job to Randy Bullock. And a lot of people felt that they lucked out in getting Jake Elliott back on the practice squad. Now, there was an actual good little plan in place. A lot of alliteration right there. But if Randy Bullock had struggled maybe in the first few weeks of the season, then the Bengals could call up Elliott onto their active roster, get rid of Bullock, and go from there. Well, Jake Elliott was claimed off of the practice squad to the Eagles, who lost their kicker. I believe their kicker is Caleb Sturgis. He's got a quad injury. They placed him on IR return. Jake Elliott is no longer in possession of the Cincinnati Bengals. We don't know how Bullock has looked in 2017 as their kicker because he didn't get an opportunity to kick a ball on Sunday. I don't know, man. Kind of a plan that totally blew up in their face, right?
If they're convinced he was the guy, this was kind of an absurd thing. I know they said it was going to be a competition, and I assume the theory is, okay, he had a better camp. He got really hot at the right time. Obviously has struggled throughout his career, has struggled in, with clutch kicks, but, in practice and training camp, preseason, he clearly had the better camp. And so if they were truly going to open it up as a competition and say, we don't believe our 5th round pick is a guy who is good enough to win this job outright, that we want to make it a competition. And if that's the case, why using a 5th round pick on the guy? I mean, I think like many people, I assume, will use a pick that high on him because you're convinced he is the guy. And he didn't have a horrible camp. He didn't make every single kick, but he had a solid camp. He made more kicks than not. He missed a couple in the preseason. There was, a couple I think were penalties where he had made them and then the kick got nullified. He had to kick him again. But that being said, if they, you have to think that you're going to pick that high and he's your kicker, why do you play this cute game of putting him on IR on practice squad, kind of hoping he sits there for the year, no one grabs him? Because there's no protection when they're on the practice squad. And even when the Raiders kicker went down, my thought was, oh crap, here's someone who's going to grab him. They obviously had their own contingency plan, and their guy did really well. But yeah, now you have 2 kickers go down in the first week, and you figure at some point someone's going to grab him. Someone did grab him, and if you're the Bengals, if you truly thought he was your guy, I think you had, like we've said before, he's the guy you should have had on the roster. So I'm sure they'll say all the right things. They'll say they're rolling with Bullock, he's their guy, and we just have to hope he is. We have to hope he does better than 80% accuracy this year. That this isn't a typical Bullock year. That maybe after 5 years he figured it out. But yeah, it just continues to maybe another decision that kind of makes no sense. Kind of like last year when they had the IR return and they decided to leave William Jackson out for the whole year when he's kind of your future at cornerback and that's a position you covet. You used the 1st round pick on him. He's healthy and you refuse to play him. So just another kind of baffling decision, but at this point it is what it is, and you have to hope that Elliott does not become a great kicker.
Well, I mean, you want to hope for his career that he, personally speaking, you want him to do well. But I get what you're saying. If you're the Bengals, you don't want to rue the decision of letting him go. I get what you're saying. But yeah, the whole decision-making process in certain spots was kind of puzzling to me. Kicker was one of those spots where, granted, both guys kicked pretty well in the preseason. That last game was a freaking disaster for both of them against the Colts. But, there's just, we go back to what we talked about, I think, last week, Scott, when we were talking about the roster and all of that, where, why not package these picks and get more premium players than quantity? I just, now Jake Elliott was one of the best players at his position, in college football, but, and I know you want to do what you think is best for the team, but I guess I just, either you're not drafting as well as everybody's hyping you up to draft. If you pick one of the best players supposedly in college at his position and he doesn't make your roster and someone else takes him, or you're not making the right decisions on who ends up making the active roster.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a great kicker and you just have I mean, they had an abundance of kicks. So if you have like you have an all pro, you have Steven Gostkowski, Justin Tucker, and you're like, what the hell? We have 14 picks. Let's just use one on this guy. And he doesn't make the roster. Okay, you know, that makes sense. You understand it was kind of a silly pick, but you kind of get it. And to your point, where you should have traded those picks to try to get more, you know, fewer great players instead of a bunch of guys who you're just going to cut at the end of the year or at the end of training camp. But that being said, you know, we don't have that great kicker. We have a journeyman who's on, I forget, his 4th or 5th team since he's joined the NFL. He's never really had a great season. He has struggled with deep kicks. He had a great camp. You kind of hope this is his year. And it almost kind of makes me think it just seems very stereotypical Marvin Lewis, the idea that I play the veterans over the better players. You know, I'm going to play Michael Johnson over Lawson and Willis at right defensive end. Years ago, it was playing Robert Gathers over Carlos Dunlap. You know, it was playing Ray Malaluga for all those years. It was, you know, benching Drake Kirkpatrick for 5 years. You know, it was when Jeremy Hill had his breakout season in 2014. We're still only going to give him half the carries. When Giovanni Bernard was a rookie, we're only going to give him a third of the carries because we need Ben Jarvis Green Ellis and his 3 yards, you know, in a cloud of dust. And, you know, we have this Evan Mathis guy. Yeah, he looks really good on the field, but, you know, what the heck? Let's just roll with this Nate Livings. And so it's just, you know, it seems like year after year they make these kind of odd decisions that don't seem to make a lot of sense. And generally it seems to be we're going with the veteran guy because we know what we have. He may not be good, but we know what we have. We know we have mediocre, but, you know, I'm scared of the unknown because the unknown could be horrible. And I'd much rather have mediocre than possibly horrible. Unfortunately, that possibly horrible could also be possibly great because they just don't. And this just seemed like one of those kind of decisions where we know what we get with Bullock. He's a career 80, 81% kicker. You know, he's going to be fairly solid until we get beyond 40 yards or until we get to the 4th quarter. He's going to be pretty solid more often than not. Other than that, he'll probably make most of his kicks unless they matter. Kind of like the team in, you know, playoff games. Unless it matters, we're probably going to win. Elliott, we really have no clue we're getting with him. So I understand that's just kind of a Marvin Lewis decision that we're going to go with, you know, the devil we know. We're going to go with this guy who, okay, is not great, but we don't want to go with the rookie because we have no clue he's going to be. We'll put him on practice squad. You know, it worked with guys like P.J. Dawson, these other folks. No one ever grabbed him. Trey Hopkins sat there. We feel confident we can dump a guy on practice squad. No one's going to take him from us. We'll just stick him there, and we'll see what happens next year. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to work out for them. So, yeah, at this point, I guess all you can hope for is when Sturgis comes back from IR that maybe you have a chance to get him back. But, yeah, that's a long way down the road.
Yeah, and that plays into our question also, what we talked about a couple minutes ago of how long of a leash Marvin Lewis is willing to give a lot of his other players, or especially offensive line and things of that nature. This has, you know, you mentioned the Nate Livings, Evan Mathis thing. I mean, that was in 2009, and that's still and we raise our fists in the air at that one a little bit. I don't know, man. I kind of think that this Marvin Lewis has shown he's trusted some rookies. He hasn't trusted a lot of others. Sometimes it's a disservice to his team. Other times it actually ends up working out. But that kind of plays that devil you know versus devil you don't type of mentality plays into this conservative nature of the Bengals and how they run their franchise. Unfortunately, you know, Elliott's gone. He's with the Eagles now, and best of luck to him. But missed an opportunity to really upgrade a spot that was one of their worst in 2016 by letting him go. We'll see. Scott, just an additional little tidbit of news. The Bengals had grabbed Christian Ringo before the start of the season and have now released him or waived him as they've activated Adam Jones for week 2. So we expect to see Adam Jones out there. Hopefully, Dre Kirkpatrick. He was in a walking boot earlier this week, but returned to practice on Tuesday. Hopefully, those two guys are out there. And you know what? Aside from the one touchdown reception from Macklin against Darqueze Dennard, and he was kind of picked on that play, so I can't fully blame him on that. But aside from that, those guys played pretty well. And like I mentioned, Flacco only had 17 attempts last week, but those guys played pretty well and kept everything for the most part in front of them. Those two young guys, William Jackson and Darqueze Dennard. So, it looks like the Bengals at least have some promising guys behind Adam Jones. If something else should happen this year, or if they end up cutting bait with him this next offseason. Scott, the Bengals take on the Texans this Thursday, and this is a game. Every time I see Houston on the schedule, I kind of roll my eyes. It's kind of like when they played Buffalo. The Bengals rarely seem to play well against a team like that for some reason. No matter how bad they looked the previous week, how bad they are in the season, the Bengals have not had good success against the Texans, and some of their worst losses in the era have come at the hands of the Texans. Playoffs, the Monday Nighter a couple of years ago when they lost, I think it was 10-7 or 10-3. Just ugly games, ugly. I will say this: be prepared as a Bengals fan to catch a lot of footage of J.J. Watt and all of the relief he has brought to Houston. The NFL's darling is J.J. Watt, and good for him. He has supposedly raised a ton of money for relief in the flooding that's happened in Houston. So awesome, but be prepared. You're going to catch a lot of that coverage. Aside from that, Scott, there are a couple of things that really worry me about this game. Yeah, the Texans have a good defense, good defensive line. It's obvious with the Bengals' offensive line struggles, but there's two things to me, two facets of this game that the Bengals have traditionally struggled with in terms of getting a win or game planning properly. One is the fact that the Texans will have a new starting quarterback in Deshaun Watson. He's a guy who can run. He's a guy who can throw. He's a guy who won a lot of games in college. The other is that it's in primetime. And I believe in the primetime stigma more than maybe some others. But those two things really worry me about this game. Am I crazy?
Not entirely. The primetime thing, I think there's two factors with that. One is they tend to play better teams in primetime, and they just don't do well against better teams. And I think the other factor is probably the John Cooper factor, which probably doesn't mean anything to anyone who did not follow Ohio State football in the 90s. But essentially, John Cooper was the Buckeyes head coach for, some period of time before Tressel and Urban Meyer. Anyway.
John Cooper Mellencamp?
He was a great coach from week 1 to week 11. Probably the best record in all of college football during that span. But when it came to the Michigan game and when it came to the bowl game, he was just awful. He just couldn't get his team up for those games. He even said in press conferences he treated them as a regular game. It's just another game. No reason to get the players all, bent out of shape or, whatever. That seems to be Marvin Lewis when it comes to these big games. He doesn't seem to be able to convey that, hey, this is a big game. We need to step it up. We need to, improve our play and play to the level of the competition. And it's not just the competition, but they're going to be playing their best game because it is a primetime game. It means a lot. Or it's a playoff, game, and they just don't, in those games, they just don't bring it. They look flat, or they look like, they're playing a, week 14 game that's meaningless, and their team's coming in, guns blazing. They're doing everything they can to win. And there's a noticeable difference. And being prime time, both teams started 0-1. Neither one wants to start 0-2. So you figure the Texans are going to be doing everything they can. And when you said a lot of footage of J.J. Watt, for some reason I thought you were going to finish that with a lot of footage of J.J. Watt in the Bengals' backfield, because I think the combination of Whitney Mercilus, J.J. Watt, and Jadeveon Clowney against
a lot of footage. Say that again. A lot of footage of J.J. Watt. What?
In the Bengals' backfield.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
because between him, Clowney, and Merciless against that offensive line, I think if anything wins this game for Houston, it's got to be that. I don't think Houston's offense is going to do it. I'm not too worried about Deshaun Watson or Lamar Miller or the whatever else they have on offense, the offensive line. I think that's an offense we can stop. I mean, I would hope so. If we're supposed to be a good defense, that's got to be just like with the Ravens. That's got to be an offense you need to stop. And with the Ravens game, the defense held their own, but that's not a good offense. And so you have to hope that, okay, it's back-to-back bad offenses. We need to be able to stop them. But then conversely on offense, what can we do? Can, Boyhe, can Fisher, can Bodine, can Bowling, and whoever we use to replace Trey Hopkins, can they stop that front, those three guys or that front seven altogether? And I think the game's probably going to be won and lost right there. And so that probably has me worried more than anything is just, that footage of J.J. Watt, that footage of Jadeveon Clowney, and that footage of Whitney Merciless sacking Dalton again and again. That's the footage I don't want to see.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about that. Yeah, I'm a little worried about that. It's a good point. I don't know. There are times when I've seen the Bengals play a rookie quarterback or a new quarterback, a la Johnny Manziel, a running guy where I was like, watch, who has had all these problems is going to come out and blast the Bengals. Well, he didn't, and the Bengals really took it to him. There are other guys the Bengals have really took it to that were, first-time starters or rookies or what have you. I liked Watson coming out of the draft, not for the Bengals or anything, but I really liked what I saw from him in the national championship. He's a guy who can move. He's a guy who can throw on the move. Maybe not the strongest arm out there, but smart guy, knows the game, winner, all that kind of stuff. I think it's a good move by the Texans, regardless of if they're playing the Bengals or whoever, that they go with him because Tom Savage isn't their answer, even though Tom Savage got a win against the Bengals last Christmas, if you remember that. I think Watson provides some trouble. And I think Watson provides some trouble with Vontaze Burfict out. I think we don't know what's going on with Sean Williams yet. He might be back soon, but I think he just kind of provides some of that that Lisberger-esque type of ad lib type of play from under center. So that's going to be an issue. We'll see. If the Texans didn't look good at all on offense last week, we'll see if their offensive line can hold. I mean, we're talking about the Bengals' offensive line just going up against Clowney and Watt and all these other guys. That Texans' offensive line let up a lot of sacks last week. They have some good defensive linemen themselves, both as rotational guys and starting guys. So. This could be a good game for them to really tee off and make the rookie uncomfortable by bringing pressure. I'm interested to see what the offensive game plan is for the Bengals this week. Is it going to be a lot of run plays? Is it going to be a lot of delays and draws to kind of catch the Texans front napping a little bit? The quick hitting thing is going to need it again this week, but Watt, as we all know, is great at batting balls at the line. Clowney's another big guy who can do it. So if they're going to be able to do that, if they're going to want to get the ball out quick, there's going to need to be some open lanes for Andy Dalton to throw to get these slants and all that. It looks like John Ross will play this week. At least, we were told he would miss probably the first game, maybe the second game, just because of the short week, but he practiced fully this week, so I'm expecting him to be out there, and maybe some gadget type of stuff with him, using his speed, his shiftiness here and there will be something that makes the difference. All in all, I think it's going to be a pretty ugly looking game. Usually Thursday night contests are, right, Scott?
Yeah, and like you said, with the Texans, who we've lost 8 of the last 9 matchups, and the last 2, the Bengals scored 6 points and 10 points. good news is we only gave up 10 and 12.
Yep.
So this game looks like that. I mean, we have two good offenses. Two good defenses. Their offense doesn't look all that good. Our offensive line doesn't look all that good. We could probably be looking at a single-digit game or, 14-10, 7-9, something crazy like that. And so, yeah, this could be a very ugly Thursday night game where people were just like, man, how did these guys get on TV?
Yeah, if that's the case after putting up a goose egg in week 1 and they can only get one score or 3 field goals or whatever, that would not be ideal. But I guess whatever they got to do to get a win is – and they've got a lot of work to do in a short amount of time based on what they put on film last week. Obviously, the Texans will be looking at what the Ravens did to the Bengals and try and exploit that. We'll get to our predictions in just a minute. I saw one in here, looked like 17-10 Bengals. I believe that was from Greg L. That might be a little optimistic in terms of both result and overall points that the Bengals will score, but we'll see if that happens to play out. Last time the Bengals played on Thursday Night Football, they hosted the Dolphins, and they did get a win last year, which was a much-needed win at that point. And they will be wearing their color rush uniforms, or I guess lack of color, because they will be wearing their all whites and blacks on Thursday Night Football with the orange helmets. I thought it was actually pretty cool looking, their jerseys last year, so kind of looking forward to that as well. But the Bengals host the Texans on Thursday Night Football. Check it out. Let's hope that they get a win, and it's a much-needed one with the Packers around the corner and a lot of other tough games coming up. Before we get to our score predictions and get out of here, Scott, let's get to some listener questions. So we're still taking some. I saw some in the YouTube chat. I wanted to get to this email. It's a little long, but I think it's really cool. I'm going to try and summarize it. We got this email from Mark Faithful. He's from across the pond, Scott, and what's really cool about Mark and him this week with him was he went to the Bengals game, and I think it was his first trip to Paul Brown Stadium. Actually, yes, it was, because that was his subject line. Duh, Anthony. Let's do some reading here. But first trip to Paul Brown Stadium. Very cool. Obviously, cool experience being a Bengals fan from abroad and going to the stadium and watching the game. Unfortunately, he got to witness in person the clunker that the Bengals put forth. So I feel a little bad for Mark. He's kind of got some questions. It's kind of more comments than questions, but I just wanted to share this. I think it's pretty cool, and I think our listeners will enjoy it, especially since this podcast is being listened to outside of the U.S., which is awesome. Hi, Anthony. Been a UK Bengals fan for over 20 years, loyal to the franchise, and have followed season after season via UK streaming, Cincy Jungle, and podcasts such as your excellent Orange and Black Insider. This year, to celebrate my shared 50-year milestone, I decided to make my first trip to Paul Brown Stadium. I picked the opening game against the Ravens based on the 50-year celebration. First home game opener since 2009, and the general good vibe around the team since the draft outcome. In April, as well as flights for myself and my wife, I forked out $400 for 2 good seats in Block 111. Since then, I sat back with anticipation for my first live experience of Bengals football at Paul Brown Stadium. Fast forward to Monday, September 11th, and I'm sitting in a hotel in West Virginia en route to Atlantic City, reflecting on what unfolded in front of me at Paul Brown Stadium. After so much excitement and anticipation, I feel deflated as a fan and let down by an organization I have invested so much of my time in over the past 20-plus years. As a follower of Cincy Jungle, Inside the Jungle, and now the Orange and Black Insider, I have read many positive and negative comments about how the franchise is run and the on-the-field results. I have, though, always used my own judgment to assess performance. Well, after that debacle, I now sympathize with these loyal season ticket holders. not to keep going too long, I've experienced many live sports events in my life, but I can honestly say I've never endured such a letdown as I faced on Sunday. In fact, I feel so strongly about I'm going to write to the club to express my level of disappointment. Can't say I blame him. Outside of this, some positives. Had a good chat with Ross Browner in the pro shop. What a genuinely nice guy. Spoke with Clark Harris on the touchline. Another really nice guy and very engaging with the fans. Met some great people, both Bengals and Ravens fans, which is good to hear because there's been some obviously the fans on both sides can get heated. So it's good to see he met good fans on both sides. I will maintain my allegiance to the Bengals and will probably come back again next year. Just want to make sure that when the team draws a big fat blank like they did on Sunday, the front office are aware and sympathetic to fans both home and abroad that invest so much time and energy supporting the team. Great podcast, Anthony. Keep up the great work. Mark in London. Pretty cool email. Summarizes a lot. Again, not really a question, I guess, but pretty cool in terms of, I'll say this. I've spent my own money and I live, for those of you who don't know, I live in Southern California and I don't have the luxury of going to a Bengals game at any point. I've spent a lot of money seeing them in San Diego. I've seen them at Cincinnati. I've seen them in San Francisco, in Oakland. I've seen them in a lot of different places. So I sympathize, and I haven't seen too many wins. So I can sympathize a little bit with Mark there, and I appreciate the email, Mark. That's really cool. But I guess you got to say, Scott, that you kind of just got to, I guess, take in the experience, especially from someone from the United States, seeing American football and going to his first Bengals game, albeit one of the worst ones in recent memory.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, you never really know what you're going to get, and it's almost like going on that Lampoon Vacation thing where they go all the way across the country to go to Wally World and it's closed. I mean, you kind of feel like that. Like, what, we just spent all this time, all this effort. You get there, and it's just a total letdown. Now, granted, obviously our listener did not go on the field and take matters into his own hands and force them to play better like they did in the movie. But, yeah, I totally understand the sentiment. There have been times where I'm sure you've gone somewhere on a trip or a site and you're like, this is it. I came all the way here just for this.
Yep.
Or go and it's like, wow, this was so much better than I expected it to be. That is very obviously very frustrating. It's very sad to hear he came all the way across here, and that was what you had to endure. And it's just, I guess that's the nature of sports, is you never know when you're going to get something worthwhile. And yeah.
Well, thanks for the email though, Mark. I hope you had a good time regardless. I know it was a disappointing result, but hopefully you had a good time, and I hope the city of Cincinnati treated you well when you were out there. I know I've had fun when I've been out there. So thanks for the email. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Very cool. By the way, Scott, you mentioned John Cooper, the guy who had trouble winning big games, bowl games, and against his biggest rivals. Guess who John Cooper is employed by right now?
I know for a while it was the Bengals. After Buckeyes let him go, is it the Colts?
Oh, no, he's still with the Bengals, buddy.
Oh, is he? Okay.
Yeah.
I know he was.
Yeah, he's scouting consultant.
I know when Ohio State finally moved on from him, the Bengals brought him in as a college talent recruiter because he was very good at recruiting players and getting good talent. He just could never win with them when it mattered. So it's very interesting to hear he's still in that role.
So, okay. By the way, we did get a comment on the CincyJungle.com comment thread from Keith Evans. I refuse to believe that Andy Dalton has somehow forgotten how to play quarterback at the NFL level. This offense is too loaded to have laid an egg. The offense has badly deteriorated under Zampese. Jackson were offensive coordinator. Dalton threw his fair share of interceptions, but at least the offense was productive and was able to hang with the best teams. This team needs a change at offensive coordinator. Again, I thought this was listener questions, but it's listener comments. I love it. That's still fine. And kind of on those same lines, Brad Van Horn in the YouTube chat asks, if the Bengals go 0-6, God, I hope not. If the Bengals go 0-6, do you think they will fire Marvin midseason? I do not think so. I think Marvin is seeing out the final year of his contract that he's currently in, for better or for worse. And that way the Bengals have, if they finish 3-13, if they finish 4-12, they legitimately have hey, this is an entire season sample size of your failure. We're not going to renew you. Smell you later. But that's my take. What do you think, Scott? Are you there, Scott? Okay, Scott's taking a break. But I don't think that Marvin is going to be fired in this season. I think he's safe for this season, for better, for worse. We'll see. I could be wrong about that, but I don't know. Corey Brewer, will our D-line tear up the Texans' struggling O-line? They should. I mentioned earlier that they had a number of different sacks. The Jaguars had a number of different sacks against the Texans last week. I think it was either 9 or 10. I have to look that up. But really took it to them, and some of them were just egregious errors by their offensive line. And to me, they looked like a worse unit than the Bengals even did this year, or in week 1. So, I think – and I think they'll need to in order for the Bengals to be in the game and take this one from the Texans at home. I waver on this one. I don't know what to think about it, to be honest with you, in terms of a score prediction. We'll say 16-13 Bengals. I would not be surprised if they lost this game. My confidence is a little shaken right now based on what I saw last week, and I think a lot of fans have that same feeling. I'll give them the win because I think they get out of this tough games 1 and 2, maybe 2 and 1, but that's going to be we'll have to see what we see this Thursday in order to predict a win against Green Bay. But Bengals are on a short week. They play the Texans. They host them at home. We'll see what they do. Let's see if they bounce back. Hopefully they do. Unfortunately, I think my co-host Scott disappeared into the mist there, so I can't get his score prediction. But we're going to get out of here. Thanks for all the comments and questions and everything you've sent to us. Again, you can catch this podcast on iTunes, on YouTube, and CincyJungle.com. Get in touch with us on Twitter and via email. We love to hear from you. Appreciate you tuning in. I know, like I said, it was a little different schedule tonight. Getting here on a short week and adjusting like we all need to with the Bengals playing on a short week. But this has been the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. For Scott Schultze, I'm Anthony Cosenza. Thanks. Have fun Thursday. We'll talk to you soon.